Hi, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us for the final webinar in the SELCAN series. My name's Heather and I help facilitate the running of the SELCAN network, who are your hosts today. And we've got Caroline Illingworth of the LEP and David Chamberlain of ELLGIA with us, who have put together a great presentation to share with you around the circular economy and disposing of waste. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Caroline and I hope you enjoy the session.
All right, thank you, Heather. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. So my name's Caroline Illingworth, and I work for the Greater Lincolnshire Local Enterprise Partnership, or LEP, where I lead on green economy and energy. And in terms of green economy, one of our main areas of focus at the moment is on circular economy. And we're in the middle of a really interesting project, which I will talk to you a little bit more about at the end of my presentation. So I thought I'd better start by explaining what the LEP is for those of you who haven't heard of us. So the LEP was set up by government around 12 years ago. We are a public-private partnership and our focus is on supporting economic development for Greater Lincolnshire. We do that in 4 ways, by acting as an advocate for Greater Lincolnshire, so working nationally and internationally to promote Greater Lincolnshire as a great place in which to invest, work and live. We act as an enabler, bringing together partnerships between the public and private sector, as well as education and academia. And we commission economic research and evidence base, and we're responsible for developing the economic strategy for Greater Lincolnshire, which is used by all of our constituent local authorities. And then over the last 12 years, we have acted as a delivery organisation for a whole series of government-funded grant fund programmes. So, as I said, one of our areas of focus within green economy at the moment is on circular economy. And so this morning, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the basics of circular economy and how some of those principles can start to be integrated into business models. So we'd better start by defining what the circular economy actually is. So it's an economic system in which we try and maintain the value of products, materials and resources for as long as possible. And if you think about how our economic system works at the moment, it's very linear. So we start by sourcing virgin material, usually by mining or drilling or by harvesting. We use that virgin material to produce things which we then sell. We use those things frequently only once or a small number of times, and then we dispose of them. And quite often we dispose of them in a way which means that they can no longer be recovered. So we send them to landfill, or increasingly nowadays, we incinerate them to generate energy. And you can see that there are a series of problems with this sort of approach. Firstly, a lot of that virgin material is finite and will run out. And secondly, inherently built into this system is a whole series of pollution sources. So we're generating carbon emissions, we're generating air pollution, water pollution, habitat destruction, and many, many others. And so clearly that's not a sustainable model. And so we need to think about how we can adjust that model to improve the environmental impact and maintain the value of those resources. And that's where the circular economy comes in. So with the circular economy, what we're trying to do is close the loops at different stages of that system. And the idea being that eventually that means that you can cut off the source of the virgin material because you're keeping the materials in use. And you're preventing the need for permanent disposal of the waste in a form that means it can't be recovered. And so by generating all of these different loops, it means that we maintain the value of those materials. And that's the key thing. I read a really interesting statistic a couple of days ago that said that a third of the things that we throw away are things that were made within a year of them being disposed of. So really short lifespan, and clearly that's just not sustainable. So when we talk about circular economy, you'll quite often hear people talk about the waste hierarchy or the 10 R's. So I wanted to have a look at those in a bit more detail and start to relate some of these principles to how our businesses operate. So we're going to start with refuse, rethink, and reduce. And I think these are quite often overlooked in terms of circular economy. It's almost as if they're so obvious, they're not obvious at all. So thinking about procurement within your business, for example, how can we rethink what we're buying in so that we maybe buy less or that we buy differently? So maybe we start to refuse new products in favour of refurbished products, or maybe we start to refuse virgin material in place of recycled material. Maybe we think about how we're using things so we can use things differently, or maybe we think about how we can reduce the amount of things that we're buying into our business. And these elements require no additional input in terms of energy or resource. In fact, quite the opposite. If we're buying less of things, then actually we're needing less energy or resource. So these are the sort of holy grail of circular economy, if you like. Then we move into reuse and repair. So these options do require a little bit of additional energy or resource input. So for example, if you're reusing something, you might need to wash it or sanitize it. And if you're repairing something, you might need to purchase a spare part. But essentially the product is still in its original form and being used for its original purpose. And then we can move a little bit more in depth to refurbish, remanufacture, and repurpose. So these are systems where a product, for example, will require a little bit more in the way of input in order to keep it in use in its original form. So this does require more in the way of additional inputs from energy or resource. So if you think about refurbishing something, maybe you need to repaint it, or if you're remanufacturing something, maybe there's quite a lot of spare parts that you need to replace within that product. But essentially that product still remains in its original form and in its original use. Repurpose is slightly different because, as the word suggests, you might not be quite using it for its original use, but it may still look pretty much as it did when it was made. And then finally, we have recycle and recover. And these are the options that, out of all of these options, require the greatest amount of additional input in terms of energy or resource. And so typically they tend to be put at the bottom of the waste hierarchy. And quite often you'll hear circular economy practitioners saying that something like recycling is the least favourable of all of these sort of options. But I have to say, I think that's a little bit misleading, and I'm sure David, who's going to talk to you shortly about recycling, will definitely disagree with that. And I think that's because we have to put it in context. Whilst it's true that out of all of these options, those two at the bottom do require the greatest additional input, it's also true that it's still an awful lot less energy or resource than if you were to manufacture something with virgin material instead. So as an example, if you recycle an aluminium can to make a new aluminium can, that requires 90% less energy and emits 90% less carbon than making an aluminium can from virgin aluminium. And for a lot of the materials that we have in use in the modern world, recycling is the only option for recovering those materials. And so it remains an absolutely critical part of this circular economy structure. And then if we relate this to the lifespan of a product, so we can think about the first three as being part of the pre-use or design phase. So this is about really carefully thinking about how we design our products and how we make our products, and thinking about whether there's a way of making the product that uses less material overall, or maybe that uses a greater proportion of recycled material as opposed to virgin material. And so that design phase is really, really important. And I think, again, quite often we don't tend to think about designing in circularity into our products, but it is a really important step and one that requires more focus. And then the next 5 steps all relate to the in-use phase of a product. So this is about extending the lifespan of a product and its constituent parts so that it can remain in use for as long as possible. And again, the design phase is important here. Designing products so that they can be easily repaired is again something that is frequently not done. So if you think about your smartphone, for example, that's actually, in most cases, deliberately designed so that you can't repair it, which is a real problem when it comes to circularity. And then once we've exhausted all of the options for keeping a product in use as long as possible, it's really important that we can recover the materials so that those materials can be used again to make something new. And so this post-use phase is really important. And the design phase again relates to this. Has a product been designed so that it can be easily taken apart into its constituent components so that those components can be recovered via recycling? And I'm sure David will have lots of stories about how difficult a lot of products are to separate out their constituent materials. I think one of the most obvious ones is a pair of trainers, which are basically impossible to separate out all of the different things that a pair of trainers is made from. And that's because of the way they've been designed in the first place. So that design phase actually is important throughout all of these stages of the circular economy. And then if we think about how we can start to implement some of these principles within our businesses, I think we can start at the top thinking about procurement and about thinking about how we can change the way that we procure materials and products within businesses so that we're focusing on refurbished items, that we're focusing on recycled materials and recyclable materials. And focusing as well on how we can reduce the inputs that we're bringing into our business. And then I think the sort of middle sections, there are some really interesting business models being developed now, which are quite different from traditional business models that take some of these principles into account. And one of the best examples, I think, is actually one that's been around for quite a long time and which you might not necessarily equate to the circular economy, but that absolutely is. And that's the photocopier that sits in the corner of an awful lot of offices. So in our offices, in county offices in Lincoln, the county council lease a large photocopier printer machine. And as part of that lease contract, there's servicing included. And then when the council is finished with it, the manufacturer comes and collects that machine. And so there are lots of benefits as a customer for the council. Firstly, they don't have to pay out a large amount of capital upfront cost to buy that very expensive machine. Secondly, they've got regular monthly payments, which makes budgeting an awful lot easier. And they don't have to worry about repairs and servicing because that's all covered under the contract. And then they also don't have to worry about how they might dispose of that machine when they don't need it anymore, or the cost of disposing of that machine because the manufacturer comes and takes it back. So from a customer's perspective, it's a really, really good solution. Now, from the manufacturer's perspective, whereas traditionally they would have made that very expensive machine and then sold it and taken the income from that, and then that would have been that. And the only way to generate more income was to make more machines at great cost. Now what they can do is get a regular income over a long period of time from each machine as that's licensed out. And then when they recover that machine back into the factory, they can remanufacture that machine at a much lower cost than it takes to make a whole new one from scratch. And then they can lease it out to another customer as a remanufactured machine. And so what they've managed to do is turn their business model from one that requires continual high cost input and one-off incomes to a model where they're getting continual income over many years for each machine. And so that's a much better model for them as well. And so both sides of that arrangement win by coming up with a completely different business model. Now that's on a really large scale, but we can also think about some of these on a really micro scale. So if you think about repair, for example, let's say you're a clothes shop or, I don't know, a hardware shop or something like that. Let's say you start to offer your customers a repair service for some of the things that you sell. So that's a real big benefit for your customers because it means they can come back to your shop and get an item repaired. You have an extra revenue stream because you're offering repairs as well as selling things. When your customer comes into the shop to get a repair done, they might have a browse while they wait and they might find something else they want to buy. And they'll certainly go and tell all their friends what a fantastic customer service you offer because you've got all these additional benefits that you're offering your customers. And so word will spread and hopefully more and more people will come into your shop. And so you've generated an extra revenue stream and you've also hopefully opened up a whole new market as well, just by offering something additional to your traditional business model. So I do think there's lots of ways that we can start to feed in some of these principles, even to the smallest of businesses. A really lovely example I heard from Yorkshire was a very small chocolate shop. And the lady who ran the chocolate shop went into her local cafe every morning for a cup of coffee and noticed that the cafe was squeezing fresh oranges every day for juice and then throwing away all of the peel. And so now the lady from the chocolate shop takes the peel and she uses that in her recipe for orange chocolate. And so now we have two micro businesses really close together on the same street, working together to share resources, which is a really beautiful example of how this can work on a really small scale. So, benefits for businesses then. So it certainly can lead to a more efficient resource use, and that has benefits in terms of reducing input costs. As we've talked about, sort of developing different business models can certainly help to generate new revenue streams or help you to access wider markets. On a large scale, some of our really big agri-food businesses within Greater Lincolnshire are really using this to great effect. So we've got several food processing businesses now using the waste that's generated from the food processing, and they're recovering protein from that waste and making protein powders, which have a high value and which has opened up entirely new additional markets for them. That working with local businesses can help to shorten supply chains. And we know from the pandemic and events since the pandemic that global and very long supply chains are very, very at risk of breaking. And so as you shorten your supply chain, that makes them more resilient. And it can certainly help to enhance your reputation and brand. So we know that increasingly customers and consumers are actively looking for businesses who can demonstrate that they are minimising their environmental footprint and actively moving away from businesses who they believe are not doing that. And so there's a real financial imperative to being able to demonstrate that you are engaging in the circular economy and hence reducing your environmental footprint. And then finally, circular economy absolutely drives innovation. And that can be on a really, really small scale, like using the orange peel from down the road in your chocolate, or it can be on a really, really big scale, like building a whole new factory to make protein powder out of, and everything in between. But even just a small change in how you're approaching things within your business, just that thinking outside the box a little bit really helps to drive a business forward. And then there are also benefits to consumers and customers and to our local communities. So clearly it's reducing waste and pollution, and that benefits every single one of us. From a consumer point of view, it leads to longer lasting products, which means better value for money for a consumer. So the more we start to design in the ability to repair and the ability for products to last for longer, that's better value for consumers. And it's led already to legislative changes in terms of the right to repair, and hopefully that will expand as time progresses. And again, that means better value for money for consumers. As we start to reduce the resource requirement in all of our business processes, it leads to greater access to resources for everybody. So, as an example, if you have a very water heavy process and you find a way to recycle that water and keep it in a loop, that means you're using less water overall, which means there's more water available for everybody else. It can lead to new skills, in particular through that innovation piece. So we can think about upskilling, we can think about retraining, we can think about developing whole new skills. And that leads to better paid jobs, more interesting jobs, and more engagement in the workforce. And part of that upskilling is around localization of wealth, but also through the circular economy, localization of resource. So if we combine that sort of skills piece with the idea about localizing our supply chains, it helps to keep all of that wealth within the region and all of the benefits of those resources within the region as well. And then finally, there are some brilliant examples of how circular economy leads to community action, which can bring communities together. So you might think about a community group setting up a repair cafe. Or in Louth, where I live, one of the local churches runs a school uniform bank, which is a brilliant way of being able to recover items that are perfectly usable that would otherwise be discarded. And the additional socio-economic benefit of that is that it gives access for people on limited incomes to goods that they might otherwise not be able to afford. So there are really, really good socio-economic benefits to engaging in the circular economy as well as business benefits. And so in the LEP, we've been working with one company in particular who we think are a really brilliant example of how the circular economy can benefit a business. And that is a company in Scunthorpe called Coreboard. So Coreboard manufacture corrugated cardboard sheets that it then sells to companies who make cardboard boxes out of them. So Coreboard do generate some waste board, either that's substandard board or surplus to requirements. And rather than pay to have that collected and taken for recycling, what they do now is they send that over the road to a business very close to them called Omnipack. And Omnipack pulp the waste board and turn it into moulded fibre products. So one of the things delightfully that they make is if you go into hospital, you might have seen the grey cardboard sick bowls. They make those. And they also make the similar sort of thing, the packaging inserts that go inside boxes as a polystyrene replacement. So straight away, there's a really excellent partnership developed between those two very closely located companies. Coreboard also send their board to Manor Packaging, who use it to make boxes. Some of those boxes are used by Omnipack for their products. And so Manor Packaging also send their waste packaging to Omnipack to be used as a raw material. And so now we have this triangle of companies who have made their own little ecosystem where between the three of them, they are minimizing the waste that they're generating. They're maximizing the value of that waste so that it's no longer waste, it's resource. And then there's an additional knock-on benefit from that in terms of the logistics, because now instead of sending a lorry out with goods and returning empty, those lorries can now be backloaded with waste material and then it all goes round in a loop. And so that means there's a reduction in the amount of lorry journeys and hence a reduction in carbon dioxide emissions. So this little ecosystem is really operating perfectly and is a really brilliant demonstration of that partnership approach and how collaborating with other businesses locally can have really huge benefits. But then Coreboard have taken that a step further, and they also work with a community interest company in Scunthorpe called the Dancing Tiger Scrap Store. So the scrap store take donations of waste material from local businesses and they use those materials to run craft workshops in local schools and with community groups. And you can see from the photograph some of the absolutely amazing things that these groups make with the waste materials. And so what Core Board have found here with the Dancing Tiger scrap store is a socio-economic benefit to utilising their waste, as well as the business benefits. So they've really managed to tick all of the different boxes in terms of benefits from the circular economy. And then finally, just to finish, I said I would just mention the project that we are running in the LEP on circular economy at the moment. So we're working with some specialists to map business, commercial and industrial activity within the circular economy across Greater Lincolnshire. So trying to identify all of the businesses who are already doing something in this space. And we want to try and assess the potential for development of circular economy clusters. To try and see what interventions we can take to support businesses to develop ecosystems operating within the circular economy. We also want to have a look at resource flows to try and assess what key materials we might be losing outside of the region at the moment that we could potentially utilise within the region. And our long-term aim with this work is to develop a strategic framework to transition our regional economy from a linear model to a circular model. So if you're interested in finding out more about that project, I've put the link on the slides, and I'm sure we'll be able to share that with you after the webinar. So I think we're going to take questions at the end of the session. So I think this is now where I hand over to David, who's going to talk about recycling. Thank you very much.
Morning. I'm just trying to find where I share this, so apologies. I'm a bit of a technophobe, so it's not allowing me to do it. Heather, would you mind sharing it and then just turn in as I say, if you don't mind?
Yeah, no problem at all. Bear with me a second.
Before Heather does that, just so very polished, Caroline. Mine will be a little bit more off the cuff than that. I tend to speak from the heart and speak as I go through the slides rather than anything's too rehearsed. There's a lot of information in my slides, which I'm happy for you to share, Heather, at the end of this, because there is a lot that obviously I'm not going to bother to run through because of the time constraints. So I shall run through each one, do a little bit on each one, but then obviously there's more information to be gleaned from taking the opportunity to do that. So I'm going to talk, following on from where Caroline was. I'm going to be talking about a bit more about how the waste industry has had to revolve and evolve, should I say, to cope with all the new legislation that will be coming in, but also how we try to reduce waste, reuse where possible, and minimise actions, which always starts best with people being more proficient themselves, similar to you do in your own home. So source segregation is the best way to do it, rather than a consolidated mix, which we try and encourage all of our customers to do, is something that we're actively working on. So if we, just following on from Caroline's first slide, which is the waste hierarchy, if you can do that one, please, Heather, which is slide 1. Yeah, so the waste hierarchy. This is the waste hierarchy from the waste processors' perspective. So obviously, what we try and do is from the top is to prevent. Obviously, if you can prevent waste from happening, that is the best way of reducing waste, which is obviously secondary there. You're not going to be able to reduce all waste streams. Quite clearly, that isn't possible. So, but where you can, obviously reduce waste, and then we go down to reuse. And as Caroline said in her presentation, is that try and maximise and reuse everything as possible. We have various processes, mechanical and manual on site, where we try and reuse as many materials that we can out of the waste that delivered in on site. We have a saying that what you might see it as waste, but we certainly don't see it as rubbish, because there is areas that we can liberate materials, and that's what we try to do. Recycle. So we have our own trading team as far as recycling materials. So we liberate as much as we can. So it'll be likes of cardboard, plastics, certain plastics. Some plastics, as you know, are single use, but those single use plastics still have a secondary use as they're oil based, so they can be used as an alternative fuel, which I'll talk about a bit further through. Then recover, and finally, obviously, what's left is to dispose of. Now we have, through our various processes on sites, through our 4 sites, we're able to actually, through our processing lines, extract 87% of the material that comes in on site. We're able to recycle or reuse. It's only that 13%, which is actually what we call a residual waste, which will then go off to be used as an energy waste from fuel, which will be either one or two, one which is called a refuse derived fuel and one which is called a solid recovered fuel. A refuse derived fuel is more of your black bag waste, so similar to what you send at home. So it'll be organic, rich, have content of food, etc. in it. Whereas garden waste, whereas a solid recovered fuel is more plastic based, film based, which has a high calorific value because it burns very quickly, but low in chlorine. And that's used in the production of cement. So they use that as a replacement for fossil fuel, pet coke and coal dust. They blow that into the cement kilns. And then with the RDF, that goes to energy from waste facilities, where they use that to burn and fire up the boilers, that's obviously the steam conversion into electricity. So once again, they're both energy 100% zero landfill avoidance. It means that we've got ethical ways of that 13% going away. Can I have the next slide, please, Heather? Sound a bit like the when COVID was around. So this slide here, which I won't sit on for too long, as I think people will. This is all about the new legislation that's starting to come through, simpler recycling. So as of March next year, businesses that have 10 or micro business that have 10 employees or more will have to do segregation. They will have to, if you've got 10, have a food waste segregation, and also have to have a dry mix recycling process, which is 7 different streams, similar to what you do at home. How that's going to be policed, we don't know as yet, because that's a lot of businesses to police and look after. But we know it's coming. So what we're trying to do in the process at the moment is we're trying to work with all of our customers to get them in a position by March of next year where they're in a state of play that they've not got need to worry. Now, a lot of people won't worry. They'll think, oh no, it's not till March next year. And to be honest with you, it is worth thinking and considering now. And the reason being is because as the waste producer, ultimately you're responsible. Us as the processor, we can advise and ask you what to do, but ultimately as the waste processor, you guys are the ones that need to get on top of this. In line with that, they're going to increase landfill tax. Now, landfill tax has increased year on year, but by 1 or 2%. It's been very minimal, but as you can see from that second box in, they're looking at 21.6% increase in landfill tax. This is obviously because they want to drive waste away from landfill. And this is where we have to make heavy investment in our processing and to make changes to make sure that we avoid landfill at all costs, which we do. Don't get me wrong, there's certain streams that have to go to landfill because there is not a process. We try to avoid those streams if possible, but your likes of asbestos, etc., they go to deep landfill because there's nothing else in the currently that will do that. So yeah, and then for businesses in 2027, businesses with less than 10 people will have to do a similar strategy. Will have to segregate food waste, etc. And then you've got the DRS scheme. The deposit return scheme, which will be coming in at the end of 25, early 26. So there's lots of legislative changes that are coming in that will affect everybody within business. And it's something that whilst it's not currently been passed, it will be passed. I know there's talk of the new government, etc., but I'm pretty sure that all of these legislative changes will be coming in. Next one, please, Heather. Sounds like one of the COVID things, doesn't it? So the 5 bars here basically saying what they're to do. So they're all designed to reduce waste. All of the new legislative changes, so through recycling, the deposit return scheme of pushing waste away from landfill, to encourage reuse and recycling, as Caroline said about the various businesses and case studies and people she's worked with about how you can utilise what you've already got. Reduce fossil fuel disposal, so the likes of the alternative energy fuel. We're actually working on a project currently within Lincolnshire about hydrogen production. We look after a lot of businesses certainly within and around the Spalding area. That as many of you will know, that Spalding is probably the second, after Kent, is probably the second biggest hub for food and the agri sector. And there's a lot of I think there's something like 90 million road miles per annum come out of Spalding from field to fork, with all the major hauliers such as Freshlink, Gist, Fowler Welsh, etc. TH Clement. All of those miles are coming out, and they're all diesel miles. So the plan that we're working on is that waste that's collected in the area will be processed in the area and then can produced as a hydrogen fuel that will go back into the trucks. So once they go, the waste they bring back, the waste they produce, will go back as a fuel, thus reducing the carbon emissions. Improve carbon performance. Once again, that's important to everybody, and that's all part due to Block 5, which is the journey to net zero in 2050. Next one, please, Heather. So ELLGIA. So I just a little bit about who we are and how we work and what we do. We're a independent waste and recycling business. You've all have heard of the likes of Veolia's, the Biffers of this world. They're national operators. We have all the capabilities of a national operator, but as a more regional, independent business, which means we can be fleet of foot. We try and stay ahead of the game. We have huge investment that we put into our business year on year to make sure that we're compliant, that we're offering the best services and solutions to our customers. I've lost my thread for a sec. So we've so what we do is we work with multinationals such as British Sugar, a lot of big business. And we've got 4 depots across the east of England, 2 down near Cambridge, 1 in Boston, in Lincolnshire, and then a 20-acre site in Scunthorpe where we create our energy from waste fuels. Waste that's collected on our own collection fleet will go through various processes and lines, and the idea of is giving a differentiated service and making sure waste goes from cradle to grave. We operate a system called Pergo, which means that we are completely paperless. We work in real time. All of our drivers work off tablets. They have, as long as there's a GPS signal, we work in real time, so people can see what's actually happening with their waste at the time it's collected to when it's disposed, and real-time information is available through our portal, so everybody can see exactly where their waste has gone, what time it was collected, what routes it was on, and its final destination. And the great thing about this as well is that because of the work that we've put in with our fuels, we've got UK-based offtake for both of our fuels, RDF and SRF, which means that there's no worry about some plastic washing up on a beach in Malaysia, or when you're sitting on your sunbed and something comes lapping in off the shore. It won't be anything from us because all of our waste stays within the UK. Next one, please, Heather. So what are we doing as a business to try and help reduce waste? So what we try and do wherever possible, we try and call our customers partners rather, because we like to work in partnership with people to help them on a journey. because it's very easy to be transactional. It's very easy for somebody to want a bin, whether it be a recycling bin, a skip, a roll on off, a compactor, whatever it might be, whatever size business you are, your local shop to your multinational. We try and apply the waste hierarchy for everyone. What we try and do is we embed ourselves with a customer or a partner, and we work with them to reduce waste. That goes on to the second one, like turkeys voting for Christmas. We want no waste, which is sounds silly. We're a waste processing business, but we want to reduce waste. It does sound stupid, but we do. We generally want to try and reduce waste. We by reducing waste, obviously reduces carbon, reduces movement. And we process and recycle. We trade various materials. We trade plastics, we trade metals, we trade cardboard. So it's of our interest to try and minimise general waste, because ultimately we have to pay to dispose of waste. You have to pay to dispose of waste, where if we've got recyclable materials, we can trade those and actually offer rebates to certain people on volumes, but obviously make money ourselves as a business. Carbon reporting. We've just, along with Pergo, we're working with a company at the moment to be able to produce all of our partners with carbon reports. Now, when I say a carbon report, a lot of people can say, oh yeah, we'll provide you a carbon report. They'll provide you a carbon report as a blended report across a truck that might go to several different businesses, collect on the same day, and you get a proportion of that. We're not doing that. We'll be able to do carbon reporting per bin. And we can granularly we can take that down to how much fuel that costs to take that bin away, what the cost of disposal was, what the lift price was, any utility process that went through it, water, electricity. We can take it down to that nth degree. Solution design. So what we're doing as well is we're going in and tailoring solutions to people. Many occasion it's the tail wags the dog. Somebody will come in to see you, they'll tell you what you need as you're the waste producer, but a lot of the times it's not what you need, it's because that's what they can offer in that area. We don't do that. What we try and do is tailor a solution to fit the needs. A lot of people will have, I visit a lot of people that have containers on site that aren't needed. They don't move for a certain amount of time. Waste sits around on site, they'll have organic material in it. And it's not doing anybody any good. It might be moving once a month when it could be moving weekly to keep that churn, to make sure, which even as a financial impact, it can be cheaper to do it that way. But the last thing people want is waste hanging around site, because waste is a consequence of what you do. It's not what you do. So what you want, a lot of people will rely on the waste processor and the supplier to give them the best advice. Sometimes that isn't passed on, because whether it might be an eager salesman that's looking for a quick sale, he's been told that he's got to sell certain services in an area, you get bought into something, it might not be best for you. So we try and actually tailor the solution to fit the job. So waste to energy, as I say, our primary goal is to extract valuable recycler and liberate it from the materials that we receive, and then once we've got that, we will then determine the residual waste that's left from that. We will determine which source of fuel it's best suited to. A lot of companies won't do both. A lot of companies will either go RDF or SRF. We decided to do both, because what that means is we're not guilty then of trying to smuggle the wrong waste stream through the wrong fuel supply. To give you an example, we've now just signed a 10-year anchor agreement with Infinium, which is the energy from waste facility in Ferrybridge, up near Leeds, who are the biggest and cleanest energy from waste facility in Northern Europe. They process 1.3 million tonnes per annum, of which we're now responsible of 8% of the inputs, which is quite a feather in the cap for us as a small independent. It means that the quality of what we're putting in there is exactly what they need, rather than us try and put stuff through that's got the wrong calorific value, high in chlorine levels. So we have an on-site chemist who mixes and blends the material. Fortunately, the good thing is, because the majority of the waste that comes into us is our own waste, we're able to control and know where that's coming from, what customers, what the richness is of those materials, and we can blend it together to make sure that we get the right mix. Better extraction methods to mine the waste of its resource. As I say, we've got various processes on certainly at the main processing site in Scunthorpe, where it goes through air knives, eddy currents to take out non-ferrous, magnets to take out ferrous, and we shred the waste down. It will go through manual picking on its journey through to the final, what we call like the residual. New technologies, as I say, we're looking to work with a company called Plagazi, as I say, in Lincolnshire, about the hydrogen. And we're actually looking as well to trial our own hydrogen collection truck. We've looked at electric vehicles as well. My personal opinion on electric is that I think electric will be bypassed. I just said generally don't think there's the infrastructure in the UK. I think hydrogen's the way forward, and I think you'll see that in the near future. I think the hydrogen route forward will be, whilst it's expensive at the moment, will be the route that most people will look to do. And carbon capture. So carbon capture is done at Infinium. So what they look to do is when the waste is burnt, they blast the flues with lime, which collects the carbon, and it stops the carbon emitting into the atmosphere. So we work with these people because they're the top of what they do. They're trusted, they're renowned, and it's a good ship to be flowing with or sailing on, because they're all taking everybody in the right direction. Next one, please, Heather. So once again, I've done a case study here, which I won't bore you with it all, but there's some good reading in there. So this was a Cambridge Science Park, which is owned by Cambridge University, down near our Cambridge office. 150 businesses in an area, which had at the time had 17 different waste providers that went on. We worked with Bidwells, who are the managing agent, and we did through various seminars, through various engagements, surveys, worked with the people on site. You've got some of the biggest R&D pharmaceuticals on that site to look at what they wanted to do, because they were having, like I say, 17 different providers, maybe 6 or 7 different collections on a day, various different trucks going on, whether it be skip trucks, roll-on-off trucks, dust carts, food, glass. It was a mishmash of the way they wanted to work. We managed to get them to go to tender, which we thankfully won, which was it would have been with a lot of hard work. But now we're the preferred supplier on the Science Park, which means that from a commercial perspective, it actually works out better for them having one supplier. So even though that might sound that it's a bit of a monopoly, it isn't, because the way we operate is we can run it like almost like a milk round. Is that we'll have a dust cart that will go on in the morning, and rather having to traipse 10-15 miles between jobs, it's going from building to building on a route that goes round. So they'll have a recycling route on a Monday, a general waste on a Tuesday, then they maybe have a recycling route again on a Wednesday, and it basically works that way. Which we're now down to, they're now down to maybe 1 or 2 routes or collections and movements a day round site, rather than 17 different suppliers going on at various times of the day. And that we're also able to reduce the cost for all of those people, because when you've got critical mass and volume, and you know what, with the work with embedded, we have embedded ourselves on site, so we know what the people are producing, whether it be polystyrene, cardboard. We're helping them to source segregate, which means that we can take that material away, repurpose it, process it, and it's worked very well. And in fact, had an email last Friday about there's another science park in Cambridge called Granta Park that have asked us to do exactly the same thing. So it's clearly working, and something that I would like to see roll out within Lincolnshire, because I think there's obviously clusters within Lincolnshire. Obviously, the big Sky County, there's lots of there's lots of green fields, and as you can imagine, there's a lot of areas for trucks to travel and move. If we can get these sort of clusters set up, whether it be us or another supplier, I think it would be a great idea to reduce carbon footprint, to reduce truck movements, and once again, you can tailor a service to fit the piece rather than have multiple services on the site. Even if it comes down to the same as Grant Park are likely looking to do, is have a consolidated waste area where all the waste is brought to a central source. This will mean that once again we'll probably send a truck on once a week, because they'll be looking to compact their waste rather than several trucks a day going on collecting wheelie bins. Next one please, Heather. Yeah, so once again, that gives you the details on what the science park is. It's owned by the Cambridge University Trinity, how many businesses, and what we do. And I think if we go forward again, I think we're now onto the simpler recycling. Next one. Yes, so simpler recycling. So the slides after this I won't bore you with, but they're worth reading. And then there's a link at the very last slide, which is to the ELLGIA site, which to give you the government information. There's a link there to explain what simpler recycling is, what your responsibilities are, and feel free, anyone wants to get in touch with myself or any of my team, I can point you in the right direction. Doesn't matter how big you are, how small you are, everyone will have to succumb to these changes. There's no getting away from it. So we're reaching out to, we've got 6,000 customers, which we're reaching out to now to get ahead of the curve, to make sure that they're all aligned and ready to go, because otherwise in March 25, all of a sudden, everybody's got a segregated food bin, segregated DMR. Two things are not going to happen there is that there might not be containers available. So that's one thing that we need to be aware of, is to make sure that we're fully kitted up. We've got all the stock and the material supplies ready to be able to do that. And if people leave it to the last minute, I think in Wales currently, I think if you don't do it, which they're quite strict on, I think it's £300 fine. So if that's brought through to England as well, then obviously there'll be a lot of people that will be getting fines if they don't if they're not interactive and react. So thank you for listening to me waffle. I know that there was a lot of information in there. Hopefully it gives you an idea on how a waste operator works. What we try and do, it's not a case of just being a bin man. We try and action and be as responsible as possible. And believe it or not, the waste industry is the second most regulated industry in the UK outside of the financial industry. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of interaction with the EA, HSE. So there's a lot to be done. Thank you once again for listening, and any questions I'll be happy to answer.
Lovely. Thanks ever so much, David. That was really interesting, as was Caroline's presentation. I think you've both really highlighted the importance of rethinking and tailoring your approach and taking on board more collaborative approaches, and how thinking about things a bit differently can sort of have benefits for everybody. So yeah, thank you to both of you for your fantastic presentations today. We haven't got any questions in the chat today, so I'll wrap up the session there, but thank you also to everybody who's attended the session. This is the final session in the series, but hopefully some of you will keep an eye out for any future events that we hold. And if you're interested in finding out more about SELCAN, please feel free to get in touch with myself. I'll pop my email address in the chat. So yes, thank you all. It's been a really informative session, and hope to see you all again soon.